Hello, my name is Joe Yu. I am the project manager for the proposed Bourne Rail Trail project. I work in the project management section at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation's Highway Division headquarters in Boston. Welcome to the public information meeting for the Bourne Rail Trail project. This meeting, which was held live at the Pecassid Village Center on November 14th, serves as an opportunity for us to provide you with important updates on the project and share the milestones, timelines, and most importantly, an opportunity to hear your feedback and thoughts as we move forward. The input we gather here is invaluable as we work to refine the project. Thank you for your interest and participation in this project. Before we get into the content of the presentation, the next couple slides will go over MassDOT's procedures on conducting live public meetings. Please note that a stenographer was present at the live public information meeting on November 14th. A verbatim transcript will be provided, of which MassDOT may choose to retain and distribute. This presentation and other meeting materials can be found on MassDOT Highway Events website, which is shown on the screen. Please note, while all questions and comments are welcomed and appreciated, we do request that folks refrain from any disrespectful comments. I'd like to take a moment to share a message about MassDOT's commitment to diversity and civil rights in all of our activities. MassDOT firmly believes in promoting an inclusive and respectful environment. As part of our ongoing commitment to ensuring fairness and equality, MassDOT ensures that all activities, including this public meeting, are conducted without discrimination. If you have any questions, concerns, or need further assistance related to diversity or civil rights, we encourage you to visit the MassDOT Office of Diversity and Civil Rights website shown on this screen. Thank you for joining our meeting. We appreciate your participation. Our presentation participants include members from MassDOT and VHB, the design consultants retained by MassDOT to provide updates as part of this public information meeting. From MassDOT, we have John Bouchard, Deputy Chief Engineer of Project Development, as well as myself, Joe Yu, from Project Management section. From VHB, we have Patricia Domigan, the Project Manager, and Marissa Gassaflius, Project Engineer. In attendance at the live public information meeting on November 14th were Marlene McCullum, the Town Administrator, and Timothy Leiden from the Bourne Engineering Department. I'd like to pass this presentation over to John Bouchard, who will provide you with the agenda and a brief introduction.
First, we're going to talk about our agenda. We're going to discuss the project goals, the status of phases 1 through 4 of the Bourne Rail Trail. Then we'll focus on the phase 2 portion of the project, the history, the alternatives analysis that we've conducted, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers and discussion to get some feedback on our implementation strategy. So our project goals. A goal of the region described in Vision 88 by the Cape Cod Commission and in parallel to the statewide bike plan is to establish and implement a region-wide trail network for all users in a healthy and sustainable manner. We want to connect the canal path to the Shining Sea Bikeway in Falmouth, which were both included in Vision 88 and in the statewide bike plan. As part of that, we're evaluating alternatives that can be implemented. Let me first state, the town of Bourne has been a great partner on all phases of the Bourne Rail Trail project. The town hired VHB to design phases 1 and 2, and in partnership with the town of Falmouth, phase 4. As the design is developed, constraints with standards, right-of-way, and permitting have surfaced. While the Highway Division designs and implements many rail trail projects statewide, we follow design standards as they interact or possibly impact stakeholders. There needs to be a compromise at times. I don't want to get into the specifics at this time. I'm going to allow VHB to go through the presentation and provide a summary. However, DOT recognizes when constraints become barriers to implementation, we need to find a path forward. We may not build 100% consensus on a project, and I could reference the Cape Cod bridges, which you're all aware of. Everyone knows that those bridges need to be replaced, and we're working diligently on the project design and permitting efforts, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And it can't simply be we need to do this, it needs to get done. We need to find a compromise on certain items, on the bridge types, on the inner, on the connection details to the roadways, and the like. So evaluating our alternatives, we developed and identified some metrics, which are listed here. And we've compared each of the alternatives to these metrics: the right-of-way, uh, wetland impacts, bridge construction, parking and trailheads, utilities and utility pole impacts, railroad safety requirements, and then we need to meet state and federal design standards. One item that we haven't really focused on yet tonight, I want to discuss, and that's Joint Base Cape Cod. Joint Base Cape Cod is the largest military training location in the Northeast. The Falmouth Secondary, the rail line, runs from Cape Cod Canal, the railroad bridge, to the north to North Falmouth. The Otis branch runs east into Joint Base Cape Cod at the Upper Cape Regional Transfer Station. So the Falmouth Secondary and the Otis branch connect Joint Base Cape Cod to the main southeastern mass rail line and complete an important part of the strategic rail corridor network, which is called STRACNet, which is a network of rail lines and rail connectors that link U.S. military installations and transportation hubs throughout the United States. STRACNet identifies Joint Base Cape Cod as one of 25 Army installations nationwide requiring rail service. STRACNet is a vital part of our national defense, making it possible for the U.S. military to move heavy equipment, supplies, and troops across the country in times of national emergency. Accordingly, in 2018, the Falmouth Secondary and the Otis branch were used to move armored recovery vehicles from Louisiana to Massachusetts. To remain prepared, the military must be able to adapt and quickly respond to threats posed by real-time world events. In looking at the strategic importance of the Falmouth Secondary line and Otis branch, the focus can't be on when did we use it last. It must be on, will it be there when we need it? To ensure military readiness, a new spur connecting Joint Base Cape Cod to the main line would need to be built before any existing rails could be removed. Because the Falmouth Secondary is a working railroad, abandoning the track would require a petition for approval from the Surface Transportation Board, as well as discussions with the Department of Defense. Any changes to the Otis branch will also have implications for the Upper Cape Transfer Station and existing contracts with operators that are in place. Let me state, this information is not debatable, and it's not open for discussion, but a fact that has been provided to MassDOT through Joint Base Cape Cod and the Rail Division. DOT recognized the constraints of the rail line and was asked to investigate alternatives that could be implemented without impacts and changes to the rail line. That's what we're here to discuss tonight. As a follow-on to our presentation on the 14th, Shore Road was originally laid out as a state highway in the early 1900s and then subsequently altered over several years. But since then has been, as we presented on the 14th, we have since determined that portions of Shore Road was discontinued as a state highway back in the 1950s and reverted back to the town of Bourne. So apologies for our mistake. On the 14th, we were assessing the right-of-way and the ownership of Shore Road. And at this high level of this assessment, we haven't drilled into the details of full survey and layout recordings. So that information is being corrected as part of this recording of our slide deck for posting on our website. As we get into the evaluation of matrix matrix slides, we want your feedback on the alternatives we presented. We don't want to fight the railroad or the military. We want to find an implementable alternative. Thank you.
The project phasing is as follows. Phase 1 is from the canal at the Tidewater Recreational Area parking lot to Monument Neck Road. Phase 2, which is what we'll be talking about today, is from Monument Neck Road to Valley Bars Circle. Phase 3 is Valley Bars Circle to Scraggy Neck Road, and Phase 4 is Scraggy Neck Road to County Road. This graphic is just a representation of each of the phases. Phase 1 starts at the canal, ends at Monument Neck. Phase 2 starts at Monument Neck, ends at Valley Bars. Phase 3 starts at Valley Bars and ends at Scraggy Neck Road. And Phase 4 ties into the Shining Sea Bikeway at County Road. The project status for each of the phases is shown on this slide. Phase 1 is at the design level that's considered 75% done. The construction advertisement date is in 2025. Phase 2 is at the alignment selection stage. The design needs to be initiated and the construction advertisement date has not been determined. Phase 3, a study to determine what the preferred alignment would be, has not been initiated and the construction advertisement date has not been determined. In Phase 4, a pre-25/concept level design has been designed, but the construction advertisement date has not been determined. The next series of slides are going to go through state and federal design criteria and the project history. The design of rail with trail projects or any shared use path project need to follow federal criteria. For rails with trails, that criteria falls under the Federal Railroad Administration requirements. Some of the design criteria that we followed for this project are listed on this slide. For shared use path designs, the design needs to follow FHWA and Mass DOT highway design criteria. Both of those agencies focus on multimodal mobility and healthy transportation designs. They also focus on safety for the path users. To get into a little bit of the Phase 2 history, the town retained VHB to develop concepts for the design of the shared use path for Phase 2. There were two alternatives that were considered for the shared use path within the Phase 2 project limits. Both alternatives were within the railroad right-of-way on the west side of the tracks. One alternative looked at a 10-foot minimum offset with varying offset at some of the constraints from the center line of track to the shared use path. The second alternative was a standard 18-foot offset from the center line of track to the shared use path. To take a look at each of these alternatives, a site walk was conducted in 2020 to review some of the constraints within the railroad right-of-way. The site walk took a look at some of the impacts to the private property that were identified as part of the development of the concept plans. Some of the impacts included along the residential properties behind the depot at Worcester Ave, residential properties at Emmons Road, the Briarwood Bridge itself. At the Back River, there would be impacts, and also just south of Monument Neck Road. It was also noted that there are environmental impacts at the Back River if an 18-foot offset was used. The next series of slides show the concept plans that were developed in 2019 and 2020 as a result of initial conversations with Mass DOT Rail Division and Mass DOT Highway Division. This plan shows that the shared use path has an 18-foot offset from the center line of the railroad track. At Worcester Ave, there are 3 properties that are behind the depot that would have impacts associated with where the shared use path is adjacent to the property itself. You can see at this location, this house would be right on the shared use path. These 2 houses here that are adjacent to Worcester Ave would require retaining walls, so the construction of the shared use path wouldn't fall within the houses or fill in the back of the houses. At Emmons Road, this property here would be about 23 feet from where the shared use path would be constructed. At the Back River, um, to avoid this blue line, which is wetlands, or to minimize the impact to wetlands, some of the things that were discussed in the field was to bring the shared use path onto the existing bridge abutment that's not currently being used by the railroad, and minimize the impacts to the wetlands that are adjacent to the bridge itself. Some of the other impacts could be minimized or avoided by putting sections of the path on boardwalk structure to span over the wetland areas. This slide shows the path with an 18-foot offset at Monument Neck Road, which is the northern limits of Phase 2. This section of the project had a raised, what we think is a septic field that's adjacent to the railroad right of way that we were trying to avoid, which shows the 18-foot offset between the center line of track and the shared use path go down to an 11.5-foot offset to avoid this septic field and to stay within the existing railroad right of way. So when we took a look at the Phase 2 alternatives, we divided the 2 alternatives into a northern section and a southern section. The reason for that is to really study what the alternatives could be uh, for each of the phases of this project. The Phase 2 south section, the project limits for this alternatives analysis would be from Worcester Ave to Valley Bar Circle, and the northern section would be from Worcester Ave to Monument Neck Road.
Thank you, Trish. For the southern part of Phase 2, which is from Valley Bar Circle to Worcester Avenue, VHB was asked to evaluate 3 different alternatives. The first alternative is a railroad trail alignment on the west side of the railroad tracks. The second alternative is a shared use path on Shore Road. And the third alternative combines the first 2 alternatives with a rail with trail on the west side of the tracks from Valley Bars to Monument Beach, and then crossing to Shore Road with a shared use path on Shore Road from Monument Beach to Worcester Avenue. The next few slides are zoomed out aerial images that show the alignment for each alternative. As you can see here, alternatives 1 and 3 are on the west side of the railroad tracks, and alternative 2 goes east on the north side of Valley Bars Road to Shore Road, where the path continues north on the west side of Shore Road. This slide continues to show each alternative for the southern part of Phase 2. On this slide, I would like to point out for alternatives 1 and 3, here a proposed bridge over Emmons Road would be needed. This last aerial view of each alternative shows how alternative 1 continues on the west side of the existing railroad tracks, alternative 2 continues on the west side along Shore Road, and alternative 3 uses the existing crossing for emergency vehicles at Monument Beach to go from a rail with trail to a shared use path. Each of these alternatives end at Worcester Avenue, where the northern part of Phase 2 was evaluated separately, and we will go over those alternatives later in this presentation. Now, I would like to take some time to discuss some of the existing features found in each alternative on the southern part of the Phase 2 analysis. The image on the left is from our 2020 site visit of the Briarwood Lane Bridge. The path would be proposed to go in the space between the existing pier and the abutment, but this would need to be evaluated further, and any impacts to the existing bridge structure would need to be looked at. The image on the right shows the existing railroad bridge over Emmons Road. Alternatives 1 and 3 propose a new bridge structure that is 18-foot offset from this existing bridge. As shown before, during the history of the project, there is a house that would be in close proximity to this proposed structure. Next, these two images are at the depot building that is on Shore Road, close to the Worcester Avenue intersection. From these two images, both taken at the 2020 site visit, with the proposed path on the west side of the railroad tracks, you can see there would be major impacts to the houses that are in close proximity to the railroad tracks, and the existing screening would have to be cleared away. Here is an example of what a typical section for alternative 1 would look like. This section is looking north, and you can see the offset from the existing rail line to the path, with a chain link fence separating the path from the tracks. This is the same typical section that is being used in Phase 1 of the project. Now, to go over some of these existing features for the second alternative, here are some examples along Shore Road. The picture on the left is of Shore Road at Worcester Avenue, shows the depot building, and you can see here that Shore Road has a horizontal curve in this location. The picture on the right is another part of Shore Road. This is an example of Shore Road having sidewalk on one side of the road, but there are some parts of Shore Road that do not have any sidewalk. Even though there is a sidewalk in this picture, it is not universally accessible. Also, this picture shows an example of the informal parking that is found in some areas on Shore Road. Next, for alternative 2, the image on the left shows a property on Shore Road that is at an elevation that is much higher than Shore Road. You can see in the image the various retaining walls, specifically the wall along the back of the existing sidewalk. To avoid major impacts at this location, one recommendation is to realign Shore Road here. Shore Road is not in the middle of the existing layout, so there could be space within the public right-of-way to shift the roadway and put in a shared use path. The picture on the right is showing Shore Road at Monument Beach. In the image, you can see the railroad tracks and the beach in the back. People park along Shore Road and trespass on the railroad tracks to get over to the beach. These images are of the Valley Bars area. The picture on the right shows Shore Road approaching Valley Bars, and the image on the left shows the end of Valley Bars where there are existing informal parking areas and the low railroad bridge that spans over Valley Bars. As part of any of the alternatives, we would propose to update this area and make it a formal parking area. Here's an example of what a typical section for alternative 2 would look like. This section is looking north, and you can see the 5-foot buffer between the existing roadway and the shared use path. In this example, we are showing a small barrier in the buffer. Here are some pictures of separated shared use paths that have been constructed. The picture on the left is of Greeno Boulevard in Cambridge, and the picture on the right is of Truman Parkway in Boston. For alternative 3, I just want to show the existing emergency vehicle access between Shore Road and Monument Beach. This is what we are proposing to use to transition alternative 3 from a rail width trail to a shared use path. Now, for the northern part of Phase 2, which is from Worcester Avenue to Monument Neck Road, VHB was asked to evaluate 3 additional alternatives. Alternative 4 is a rail width trail alignment on the west side of the railroad tracks. Alternative 5 is a shared use path on Shore Road. And alternative 6 is a rail width trail alignment on the east side of the railroad tracks. The next few slides are zoomed out aerial images that show the alignment for each alternative. As you can see here, alternatives 4 and 6 are on the west and east side of the railroad tracks, and alternative 5 goes north on the west side of Shore Road. This slide continues to show each alternative for the northern part of Phase 2. On this slide, I would like to point out for alternatives 4 and 6, proposed bridge structures over the Back River Bridge would be needed. For alternative 5, the shared use path is proposed to fit on the existing bridge structure for Shore Road. This last aerial view of each alternative shows how alternatives 4 and 6 each continue on the west and east side of the existing railroad tracks. Alternative 5 continues on the west side of Shore Road to Old Dam Road and then crossing Monument Neck Road. Each of these alternatives end at the Monument Neck Road and President's Road intersection where they connect to Phase 1 of the project. Now I'd like to take some time to discuss some of the existing features for each of the alternatives on the northern part of the Phase 2 analysis. These two images are from our site walk back in 2020. The image on the left shows the concrete foundation that is on the layout line on the west side of the tracks. The image on the right is at the Back River. There is an existing bridge structure that goes over the Back River for the tracks. As you can see in the picture, there's salt marsh around the river. This picture of Evergreen Hill Road shows an example of a roadway crossing. At this crossing, there's a lot of existing vegetation that would have to be cleared away to make sure there's adequate sight distance for the crossing. Here, similar to alternative 1, here's an example of what a typical section for this alternative would look like. This section is looking north, and you can see the offset from the existing rail line to the path with a chain link fence separating the path from the tracks. This is the same typical section being used in Phase 1 of the project. For alternative 5, for this section of the path that would be on Monument Neck Road, you can see from the image on the left that there are parts of Monument Neck Road that aren't in great condition, which would get repaired with the installation of a shared use path. Also, on this image, you can see that there is a sidewalk on one side of the road, but similar to the sidewalk condition on Shore Road, it is not universally accessible. The image on the right of this slide shows the intersection of Shore Road and Old Dam Road. This is a very wide intersection, and on the corner is the Monument Neck Cemetery, which is a cultural and historic site. There is a pinch point at the corner of the existing stone wall, which results in the path through this area needing to be evaluated further so we don't impact the cemetery. These two images for alternative 5 show some additional sections of Shore Road. The image on the left is of Shore Road over the Back River, where the shared use path is proposed to fit on the existing structure. This bridge was built in 1931, and further structural analysis would be needed to determine the suitability of putting a shared use path on the bridge. The image on the right shows how there are more driveways that connect to Shore Road in the northern section of Phase 2. During our analysis, we saw that there are more houses and residents in the northern section of Phase 2 compared to the southern section of Phase 2. Also, this is another section of Shore Road that has an existing sidewalk, but like what we have seen previously, it is not universally accessible. This typical section is the same as shown before for the southern part of the analysis. The section is looking north, and you can see the 5-foot buffer between the existing roadway and the shared use path. In this example, we are showing a small barrier in the buffer. Here are some of the existing features for alternative 6, which is the rail width trail on the east side of the tracks. The picture on the left is an example of how also on this side there are existing buildings within close proximity to the tracks, and the picture on the right shows how there are no encroachments at Monument Neck Road on the east side. This is an example of the typical section for the path being on the east side of the tracks. Similar to the west side, there is a separation between the tracks and the edge of the path and the fence along the shoulder that is on the rail side. Next, I will go over the metric that VHB evaluated in our study of all the alternatives. Now, taking all of the information that we found from our analysis, we used the metrics seen here on the slide to evaluate and compare each of our alternatives. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Mass DOT.
So evaluating our alternatives, we developed and identified some metrics, which are listed here. And we've compared each of the alternatives to these metrics: the right-of-way, wetland impacts, bridge construction, parking and trailheads, utilities and utility pole impacts, railroad safety requirements, and then we need to meet state and federal design standards. One item that we haven't really focused on yet tonight, I want to discuss, and that's Joint Base Cape Cod. Joint Base Cape Cod is the largest military training location in the Northeast. The Falmouth Secondary, the rail line, runs from Cape Cod Canal, the railroad bridge, to the north to North Falmouth. The Otis branch runs east into Joint Base Cape Cod at the Upper Cape Regional Transfer Station. So the Falmouth Secondary and the Otis branch connect Joint Base Cape Cod to the main southeastern mass rail line and complete an important part of the strategic rail corridor network, which is called STRACNet, which is a network of rail lines and rail connectors that link U.S. military installations and transportation hubs throughout the United States. STRACNet identifies Joint Base Cape Cod as one of 25 Army installations nationwide requiring rail service. STRACNet is a vital part of our national defense, making it possible for the U.S. military to move heavy equipment, supplies, and troops across the country in times of national emergency. Accordingly, in 2018, the Falmouth Secondary and the Otis branch were used to move armored recovery vehicles from Louisiana to Massachusetts. To remain prepared, the military must be able to adapt and quickly respond to threats posed by real-time world events. In looking at the strategic importance of the Falmouth Secondary line and Otis branch, the focus can't be on when did we use it last. It must be on, will it be there when we need it? To ensure military readiness, a new spur connecting Joint Base Cape Cod to the main line would need to be built before any existing rails could be removed. Because the Falmouth Secondary is a working railroad, abandoning the track would require a petition for approval from the Surface Transportation Board, as well as discussions with the Department of Defense. Any changes to the Otis branch will also have implications for the Upper Cape Transfer Station and existing contracts with operators that are in place. Let me state, this information is not debatable, and it's not open for discussion, but a fact that has been provided to MassDOT through Joint Base Cape Cod and the Rail Division. DOT recognized the constraints of the rail line and was asked to investigate alternatives that could be implemented without impacts and changes to the rail line. That's what we're here to discuss tonight. As a follow-on to our presentation on the 14th, Shore Road was originally laid out as a state highway in the early 1900s and then subsequently altered over several years. But since then has been, as we presented on the 14th, we have since determined that portions of Shore Road was discontinued as a state highway back in the 1950s and reverted back to the town of Bourne. So apologies for our mistake. On the 14th, we were assessing the right-of-way and the ownership of Shore Road. And at this high level of this assessment, we haven't drilled into the details of full survey and layout recordings. So that information is being corrected as part of this recording of our slide deck for posting on our website. As we get into the evaluation of matrix matrix slides, we want your feedback on the alternatives we presented. We don't want to fight the railroad or the military. We want to find an implementable alternative. Thank you.
Thank you, John. As we close out our presentation with these last two slides, I appreciate the context that John Trish, and Marissa provided. MassDOT's recommendations boil down to the characteristics of being constructible and implementable. MassDOT's recommendation for the southern portion of the Phase 2 trail is Alternative 2, also known as the Shared Use Path on Shore Road. The Shore Road Shared Use Path alternative is recommended because it provides an opportunity for safe accommodations for pedestrians and bicyclists. In addition, Shore Road is state highway layout, which would be under MassDOT highway jurisdiction. While there may be potential right-of-way impacts associated with this alternative, there is potential to shift the alignment of Shore Road. For the northern portion of the Phase 2 trail, MassDOT's recommended alternative is Alternative 4 or 6. Both are rail with trail alternatives. Alternative 4 is the rail with trail on the west side of the railroad. Alternative 6 is rail with trail on the east side of the railroad. Both alternatives will require significant collaboration between the Highway Division and the Rail Division. At this northern portion of the Bourne Phase 2, we are recommending the rail with trail to avoid significant right-of-way impacts to Shore Road properties. The neighborhoods at this area are denser with a good amount of driveway crossings, which would increase potential conflict points between vehicular traffic and bikes and peds. While there may be impacts to private parking on Shore Road businesses with these alternatives, we still find the rail with trail alternatives to be less of an impact compared to a shared use path on Shore Road, especially given the context of historic impacts. Now that you've heard us speak, we'd like to hear from you too. At the live public information meeting held on November 14th, the audience had an opportunity to provide their feedback to the presentation participants. If you missed your opportunity then, we encourage you to voice your input at this time. We encourage folks to provide any comments and questions they have on this presentation and this project. Please address your comments to MassDOT Project Management at dot.state.ma.us with the project file number 610673 in the subject line. Please note that this project is still in the preliminary stages, so we may not be able to answer all your questions fully at this time. And with that, we thank you for joining us for this opportunity to present the Bourne Rail Trail Phase 2 project. We appreciate your attendance and look forward to any feedback. Thank you and have a good day.